Welcome. Welcome to week 6 of PSSL 6240 here at George Washington University. I hope, again, your week 5 went well and your papers, while you're watching this, should be near completion. So just announcements. First announcement, Adobe Connect session. We had one last Thursday. I think it went pretty well. Kudos to the group that went. And we're going to have Group 3 is going to talk Boston Marathon in 2 weeks after that, or a week from Thursday, I should say. And we'll shift or continue at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for that. So they'll cover the Boston Marathon. What I'll also mention is that I'm going to do a jobs talk. So how to get a job in the federal government, careers in the intelligence community, intelligence contracting, homeland security contracting, those types of issues. So one, please send me your questions beforehand so I can try and know those answers when I come into the Adobe Connect session. And secondly, if you have expertise in hiring or working in one of the agencies and you want to bring that forward, please do so that your classmates get a perspective or get your perspective. So second announcement, again, paper 2, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, if you're not doing paper 2 by now, get it to me Sunday, 11:59 p.m. And finally, current events. What made the headlines this week was talking about publicizing terrorism. And I don't want to get into a political debate here, but the Trump administration talked about certain terrorist acts not being publicized, and you got on the media for not giving it publicity. Some of them might have been publicized, many of them were publicized, but I think that kind of misses the point. The point is that no terrorist should be given publicity. The point of terrorism is to garner some sort of publicity, whether it's a group that wants to advance a political cause or a deranged individual that thinks that by killing people they can get their name in the headlines. That is a good motivator, or that is a motivator, a strong motivator of terrorism. So if there would, and again, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if you stop publicizing terrorist acts, if you do not give them publicity, you will probably stop terrorism. I probably don't have as much quantitative analytical backing for that, but again, the motivations, people follow incentives and motivations, and if they stop publicizing this, then terrorism would probably go away. So week 5 review, counterterrorism strategy, U.S., and again, probably the last time I talk about the Obama administration in this class. I'll probably shift to the Trump administration. But I hope you've seen what works, what doesn't work, based on the lectures and based on your own experiences as well. And I hope you can look at the EU strategy and look at several facets of what the EU did according to that PBS Frontline. Again, if you didn't see that documentary, please watch it, because it'll give you a lot of ideas for your final paper, and it's something as professionals in this field you should know about. So please watch that PBS Frontline that I assigned. But I think what the line that I took away from that was you can only watch someone 24 hours if you're Crockett or Tubbs. And for those of you who aren't old enough, that's Miami Vice. It's Miami Vice. That's from Miami Vice, and I don't know, maybe there's not a lot of people who remember watching Miami Vice growing up, but Crockett and Tubbs were able to watch someone 24 hours. That's not possible. We have about 7,000 people on our no-fly list, give or take. You can't watch them all 24 hours a day. And we'll talk about that this coming week when we're talking about the Boston Marathon attacks or even the Fort Hood shooting. So even if people are on your radar, it's very hard to interdict them. If you have ideas for this, please bring them up in your final paper. Because again, you would need the entire FBI to watch everyone who's on the no-fly list, and that doesn't even include the bigger lists like the selectee list, which has roughly 30,000 people on it, and then the big terrorist screening database, which has over 1 million people. So even if we knew that Tsarnaev was a bad guy and he was on our radar, you can't monitor him forever. Nidal Hasan, we're going to talk about the intelligence failure for Nidal Hasan this coming week. But again, if he was on the radar screen of the intelligence community, he didn't commit a crime or do anything that could be detained, that he could be arrested for, until he started to fire into that soldier processing center. So there's resources, there's constitutional limits, and that's I call it the donut hole, the gap between someone doing bad things, let's say surfing on the internet on terrorist style wireless, or even being part of a conspiracy in some sort of order, and then doing something where you can arrest them or detain them. That is the donut hole that the EU, the PBS Frontline, talked about in detail, and it's been been impacting us in the United States. And we'll talk about more of that in week 6. And then Israeli comparisons, again, I think I went over that, what the Israelis do well that the United States doesn't do, everything from sharing tactical, strategic intelligence or not stratifying their intelligence community to having a more resilient population that if there's a bombing, there isn't massive shutdowns or massive panic. That in and of itself is probably the best tool to stop terrorism, is that public resiliency that the Israelis have, which I believe the United States lacks. And when you see our reactions to some of these attacks within Boston, Orlando, I think we don't have that level of resiliency. But if you want to debate me on that, I'm more than willing to hear on your papers. And then week 6 preview. 9/11 report, again, just read one chapter on it. And the question to keep in the back of your mind when reading the 9/11 report is, all right, these intelligence reforms that we're supposed to do after 9/11, do they work? Why or why not? National Geographic documentary, Road to 9/11. Excellent documentary. It's based on the 9/11 Commission. So, don't read the whole 9/11 Commission report. I only assigned one chapter. But the National Geographic gives you the kind of the play-by-play that happened on 9/11. And I want you to, when you're watching that documentary, is to think about all the times that the 9/11 hijackers should have been discovered if you're looking at this from a law enforcement perspective. So think about that in the back of your head when you're watching that movie. Nova, Inside the NSA, excellent documentary on the failures of the National Security Agency in discovering the 9/11 plotters. So again, that's a great documentary. BBC documentary, great documentary on the underwear bomber, the Christmas Day bomber, as he's often called, back in 2009, and what the intelligence failures were when Muttalib tried to conduct his attack, and why the intelligence community failed to connect the proverbial dots. And then finally, the Fort Hood report. Again, don't read the whole. I assigned about 60 pages of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a short snippet that was on the news or in a documentary this past year that covers the Fort Hood intelligence failure, and I'll post that along with this video as well. So watch that, and then just kind of read the Fort Hood report, the pages I assigned, with enough eye that you understand what the intelligence failures surrounding Fort Hood or Nidal Hasan was. So week 6, again, a lot of documentaries. All are family-friendly documentaries. Feel free to make it a movie night with your significant other. If I'm not saying that's a great Valentine's Day to do, but that's what you want to do. It wouldn't be a bad idea. But again, these are all family-friendly, all very informative, even from the non-intelligence perspective. So with that being said, I look forward to reading your papers, and I will see you on the discussion boards.